Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach was the very first free roam FNAF game. Developed by Steel Wolf Studios, the hype around this thing was insane, with arguably more excitement for its release than any other FNAF game. But when it finally came out, fans were disappointed, and it quickly spawned a ton of video essays completely trashing the thing. A DLC, a movie, a VR game, and an anniversary game later, Steel Wolf made the second FNAF game in Security Breach's style. Secret of the Mimic was received a lot better than Security Breach. While both had their fans and detractors, the ratio was definitely much more favorable for Secret of the Mimic than it was for Security Breach. So I want to analyze why exactly that is, and how Secret of the Mimic improved on Security Breach's mistakes. Bad gameplay was one of the main criticisms of Security Breach. For the most part, it was extremely bland and repetitive. Most of the time, the player's best option for dealing with any situation was simply to run past anything and everything on their way to wherever they needed to go. Trying to use stealth was almost always a bad idea, as it was slower since you were sneaking and had to carefully plan where to move rather than just running right past. And since most of the areas in the game were extremely wide open, it was less effective than just running since your odds of being spotted were pretty high. Theoretically, the reward for successfully using stealth was that you could avoid dealing with the animatronics altogether, but dealing with the animatronics was incredibly easy since the player's sprint was faster than the animatronics could run. All you had to do was look in the opposite direction and press W and space at the same time, and the animatronics wouldn't be able to catch up. The stamina bar does alleviate this problem, but all you have to do is dip into one of the many hiding spots around the map and you're safe. While the animatronics could search hiding spots, it was pretty rare. But this is much more common on the latest patch. However, all it really does is make gameplay more frustrating since the aforementioned wide open areas make stealth nearly impossible in some cases, such as with the Showtime sequence, so when you inevitably have to go into a hiding spot, you're either safe or completely screwed with very little you can do about it. And if the animatronic chasing you just so happens to be Roxy, you get to wait what feels like hours before the game decides if you live or die. Also, judging Security Breach by what it became months after launch when everyone had stopped playing isn't the best way to evaluate a game in my opinion. These problems get even worse when you get either the Phaser Blaster or Phascam, both of which turn the gameplay into an absolute joke, especially the Phascam. Another problem is that because of all the areas are so big, the animatronics have virtually no chance of finding you by themselves, which would make them completely useless. The game does attempt to keep gameplay interesting with these things, but the staff bots are more of an annoyance than anything. They are pretty much the only way anything will ever find you, but again, you can just run and the animatronics will not be able to catch up with you. And because of how tedious stealth is in this game due to the new complete lack of mechanics that enhance it, players invariably choose to just run past everything. The staff bots are a band-aid that attempts to solve one problem, but have no regard for whether the solution makes the gameplay at all interesting, and don't account for any of the other problems in the gameplay that feed into each other. So, how does Secret of the Mimic compare? Well, for starters, the main problem of the player being faster than the animatronics is solved. You actually have to use stealth, and you can only run for so long before the Mimic catches up to you. And with the way the environments in Secret of the Mimic are designed, stealth is actually much more feasible, as there are lots of objects and barriers you can sneak behind while still making your way to your destination. The distractions, which were in Security Breach, but I didn't mention them because they were completely useless, are actually useful now, as they allow you to force the Mimic out of an area you need to be in or go through, which is a much more common situation now that areas are less open. This also solves the need for staff bots. The Mimic can actually find you by itself, which makes for much more enjoyable gameplay and makes the Mimic seem like more of a threat. While Security Breach can be somewhat repetitive in a similar way to Security Breach, it is much less of a problem since actually having to pay attention makes the gameplay more engaging. I don't even really have a lot to say here. Most of the problems with the gameplay were solved with just a few simple changes. This section is going to be weird because almost no FNAF game handles its story well due to the fact that they're more often concerned with lore hints than actually telling a good story. Both games suffer from this problem to some extent, but Security Breach does way more. The basic setup for Security Breach is that you, Gregory, are a child trapped inside the Pizzaplex until 6 a.m. who is being hunted down by the animatronics. The basic setup for Secret the Mimic is that you, Arnold, are a fast technician who is being forced to retrieve an asset, the Mimic's blueprints, from an abandoned building while being hunted down by the Mimic. On the surface, both of these are about equally good premises for a story, at least in my opinion, but one is definitely handled better than the other. In Security Breach, the story is all over the place. After being locked inside, Freddy tells you to make your way to the atrium, but that you need to upgrade your pass first. When you try to do so, the machine gives you a daycare pass. You head to the daycare, the lights go out, you have to turn them back on. Freddy picks you up and tells you that there are other exits you can go to. You head to one, it doesn't work. You get captured by the security guard who is trying to find Gregory because he's not supposed to be here and is presumably trying to get Gregory out, which is also what Gregory wants, but Gregory is hiding from her because...
I don't know who she is, but she's trying to get me.
Okay. You escape from the furry, who I didn't mention because she's not relevant to the plot. Freddy informs Gregory that he's low on power and that he needs to get to parts and service, so Gregory proceeds to run off by himself to help get Freddy to parts and service, and you may have realized the problem by now. The entire game is like this. Our goal is made clear to us very early on: escape the Pizzaplex by surviving until 6 a.m. or finding another way out, but almost nothing the player does actually puts them closer to that goal. We try to leave very early on, but it doesn't work, and then everything else is just going after whatever just so happens to pop up. No action the player takes actually brings them closer to the objective they are given. Yeah, completing gameplay objectives is what causes time to pass in-game, but in universe that's just the normal passage of time. As a result of all this, everything just feels like a chore since you're not really working towards anything. And once you reach like 4 a.m., the game just decides to completely stop giving you reasons for things. You spend a significant amount of time trying to get this go-kart working for reasons that are never explained and only kind of make sense after it's over, but not really. And after that, it's time to leave. Except maybe not, because apparently there are disappearances that were literally never mentioned up until this point, and like half of the endings don't make any sense because they require context that does not exist. Secret of the Mimic handles this much better in my opinion. Shortly after arriving, Dispatch, who's essentially our guide, tells us exactly what the plan is for getting the blueprints, obtain all the permissions to access the office with the blueprints in them, and then leave. Whenever Dispatch tells you to go somewhere and do something, the player knows exactly why they are doing it and how it brings them closer to achieving their goal. This change in structure gives Secret the Mimic a leg up over Security Breach, as you actually feel like you're making progress. Once you get to the moment where you have to choose to keep playing to get all the endings, the story still mostly makes sense. It's a bit mysterious initially, but spoiler warning for a game that came out a year ago, Fiona, the AI not the human, mostly explains everything. And the tapes you have to watch allow you to easily put most of the story together. The audio logs you can find around the map let you fill in most of the blanks. Overall, the story is pretty simple to put together, and you'll likely absorb most of it just by playing the game casually, which is not the case for Security Breach. As for the actual quality of the story you find by reading between the lines and putting all the clues together, I do not know because I stopped paying attention to the lore of this franchise the moment it stopped being necessary to know what was going on, a decision that is absolutely going to come back to bite me when the next game comes out and I have no idea what's happening. While neither of these games are particularly scary, Secret of the Mimic definitely has the edge over Security Breach in that regard. The environments in Security Breach are incredibly brightly lit, although there are plenty of exceptions. The areas in Secret of the Mimic aren't super dark, but they don't feel like I'm constantly being flashbanged either. I probably don't have to tell you why that creates a better atmosphere for a horror game. Humans are naturally afraid of the dark, as it obscures and limits our knowledge of our surroundings. While most of us eventually get over the near universal fear of the dark we had in childhood, some of that fear remains. Well, on some level, this does make sense. Security Breach takes place in a massive, futuristic building that is still operational, while Secret the Mimic takes place in an abandoned facility from the 70s. That doesn't change the fact that one's atmosphere is way scarier than the other's. Also, Security Breach takes place almost entirely after the Pizzaplex is closed, so they absolutely could have dimmed the lights a bit and it would have made perfect sense. The animatronics in Security Breach are also way less scary. Their designs are all brightly colored and they all have distinct personalities, which makes them more human and thus less scary. The designs of the costumes the Mimic wears look a lot more like the FNAF 1 animatronics. They still look like mascots for children, but they utilize the uncanny valley to look creepy, and the colors used are much less bright. I already mentioned the gameplay in a previous section, but since Secret the Mimic's gameplay is so much more engaging, it is also more tense as the player has to be doing more to succeed than just running away. Also, the Mimic talks significantly less. In Security Breach, the animatronics are rattling off the same 5 or so lines over and over again. While some of the suits the Mimic inhabits do have voice lines, they are spoken way less frequently. Also, I'm not entirely sure of this, but it seems like the range for hearing the Mimic talk is way less than the range for hearing any of the animatronics talk. You can sometimes hear the animatronics from across entire rooms, which does not seem to be the case for the Mimic. The background noise is also more tense in Murray's costume manner than in the Pizzaplex. Since the Pizzaplex is acting like it's still open, there is a lot of music and audio played that is meant to sound like you're in an entertainment building. Since the costume manor is abandoned, there is way less of that, as well as way less noise in general, which creates a much more eerie atmosphere. That brings me to the main reason why I think Secret of the Mimic feels scarier than Security Breach. The atmosphere just feels more empty. Atmosphere is a huge part of making a game scary, since for a significant chunk of any game, the player will not be actively dealing with anything, and thus the environment they are in determines how they feel. Generally, having a more empty environment will be scarier as the player will feel more alone and like they shouldn't be somewhere, two traits that abandoned buildings also have by nature, while operational ones do not. Secret of the Mimic feels empty, not to the point of being bland, but just enough that the atmosphere is passively somewhat uncomfortable to be in. Security Breach feels packed full of things like you're at an amusement park, and that is not a feeling that is conducive to scaring you. I do want to briefly mention this because it would feel unfair to Security Breach not to when measuring fans' reaction to both games. There are a lot of reasons I just listed as to why people generally preferred Secret the Mimic to Security Breach. Better gameplay, story, and horror. But if we're talking specifically about why people do and don't like them, we need to talk about expectations. Security Breach had way higher expectations to live up to than Secret of the Mimic. Secret the Mimic had a few trailers and teasers, and that was about it. Steelwool did not put a ton of resources into marketing the thing. Security Breach, on the other hand, had like 3 trailers, one of which was first shown on the PlayStation 5 showcase, Scott's Games teasers, a website dedicated to teaser videos, and 2 games worth of effort into setting it up. That, coupled with the long wait due to the delays, meant that the game was going to have to do a lot to live up to the hype. So, was Secret of the Mimic more positively received because it was better? I would say yes. But did the lower expectations also contribute to that? I would also say yes. So, almost across the board, I would say that Secret of the Mimic is better than Security Breach, and I imagine that most FNAF fans would agree with me. But there is one very important thing that Security Breach did way, way better than Secret of the Mimic, and that is contributing to the fan base. All of the reasons why the game isn't scary are also reasons why it gives off, I don't know, a fun vibe. The bright and colorful elements, as well as the personalities of the animatronics, as well as the sheer scope of the thing. I haven't mentioned it, but Security Breach is a much larger game than Secret the Mimic. Gave the fans much more material to work with, and the Neon 80s aesthetic was much more appealing to create fan work with than the run-down warehouse that is Murray's Costume Manor. The casual gameplay and the lack of horror made the game more accessible to new fans as well, something that the marketing also definitely contributed to. I saw a ton of fan works for Security Breach, and the much more extensive marketing and hype meant that people were talking about this thing way more after its launch than Secret the Mimic after its launch. There might be more videos dedicated to Security Breach than any other game in the series. Also, since the story of Security Breach was so confusing, fans put a ton more effort into trying to solve it than the comparatively more straightforward nature of Secret the Mimic's story. So many theories were made about Security Breach with fans trying to figure out what on earth was going on, connecting dots, putting their own ideas forth, talking with each other. The very reasons why so many people hated Security Breach, the bad gameplay, the mess of a story, the lack of horror, the overhyping, are the same things that contributed to its greatest strength by making the game more accessible, driving fans to try and put the pieces together, and bringing new people into the fandom. And that's not to say that I haven't seen great fan creations for Secret the Mimic, or that there were not a ton of theories, or that absolutely no one talked about it. I'm talking about it right now, and I've talked about it before, but it is to say that Security Breach contributed to the FNAF community in a way Secret of the Mimic didn't, and that counts for something. Well, I hope you enjoyed. Please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. I'm trying to see if I can get to 100 subscribers by the end of the year. Also, feel free to let me know what you think about these two games and how they compare to each other. Anyways, that's about all I wanted to say. See you later.